Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for watching today, for joining us. Another in the series of the Carsey School's efforts to keep the public informed, especially during this time when a lot of us can't get together as often as we'd like to. My name is Bruce Mallory. I'm a professor emeritus of education at the University of New Hampshire, currently senior advisor to New Hampshire Listens, and leading the efforts on the part of the Carsey School to support the Commission to Study School Funding, which is a fabulous opportunity for us to help the state achieve its goal of solving what's been a longstanding challenge for our public schools and for our communities, our taxpayers, and our students and teachers and parents in the state. So we'll share with you this afternoon today some of the ways that we're approaching that work, some of the challenges that we're facing, some of the aspirations that we have to really address this challenge, and hopefully tweak your interest and invite you to participate in opportunities over the summer and fall to inform the Commission about its work and ultimately its recommendations. I'm joined today by Jordan Hensley, a policy analyst with Carsey School, and I'll turn it over to him to introduce himself, and we'll get the conversation started.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, glad to be here. Excited to be working with the Commission. And so I think really just as we start to think about this topic broadly, I'd ask you to maybe set up for folks, what is the Commission to Study School Funding? How did it come to exist? Why is it here?
So the Commission is what's referred to or described as an independent commission established by the New Hampshire legislature, the General Court, in its last session. Over the course of the prior legislative session, the legislature grappled again with the challenges of creating a more equitable funding structure for our public schools. The legislature, in the budget resolution that really didn't take place until the fall of 2019, in addition to providing some short-term 1-year and 2-year fixes for school districts that were suffering from the current formula for funding our schools, the legislature also established this Commission to Study School Funding, as I say, an independent legislative commission. It consists of 16 members, most of whom, I believe it's 12 of whom, are elected representatives, and then the remainder are members of the public appointed by the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, the Governor, and ultimately appointed by the person elected to be the chair of the commission, Dave Luno, who's a representative from the town of Hopkinton. The other public members include school superintendents, business leaders, former representatives, educators. So it's a group that's been involved, several of them, in prior attempts to study and address the challenge of school funding in New Hampshire. So it's informed by a really deep kind of historical perspective in the members. It's many of the members, whatever other hats they wear, they've also been school board members, they've been superintendents. These are folks that have really, I think, lived the challenges represented by school funding in the state. The Commission is charged with submitting a report back to the legislature on December 1st of this year that essentially will include recommendations to create a more equitable and proportional way of raising revenues for our public schools and then distributing those revenues out to the many school districts that we have across the state. I think you and our listeners will be aware that the core challenge here, the nub of the problem, has been that the high reliance on property taxes in New Hampshire to fund local schools has meant that schools with the capacity to raise revenues through property tax because there's relative, what we call property wealth in those communities. That capacity is much greater than communities that do not have much property wealth, are unable to raise the same amount of funds that wealthier districts can. And the consequences for that then are that students in property wealthy school districts are likely to have more access to a broader curriculum, to sometimes more qualified teachers, to smaller class sizes, to newer forms of technology, to more recently renovated building facilities, to sort of extracurricular, co-curricular supports that expand their learning. And those students who happen to be living as a function of where their families live in so-called property poor districts simply have fewer opportunities in their educational experience than their peers do in those other communities. So these inequities defined by community boundaries, school district boundaries, and by the relative wealth within those boundaries is something that the courts have ruled to be unconstitutional. And educators, policymakers, and public leaders for years have said is not acceptable for our state. We remember that this began in a very specific way after the so-called Claremont lawsuits were brought forward, and the state Supreme Court handed down its decisions a couple of times in the 1990s. There's been subsequent litigation since then. There's current litigation that again gets back at the question of how it is we fund our public schools, what should go into the sort of the base funding formula so that school districts have a kind of a foundation from which they can assure an adequate education, and then how to weigh additional factors that affect the cost of educating New Hampshire students, whether students have special needs as identified by federal and state law in terms of special education services, whether they are English language learners, whether they come from families with minimal financial resources, or whether they're students who, by the time they've reached third grade, have not yet achieved reading proficiency, which is an important flag for ongoing educational challenges that have and then lifelong consequences. So that's a little bit of the origins of the commission's work itself. The commission's charge is fairly broad. We've been asked to revisit and modify as needed the definition of an adequate education, what goes into what Senator Khan refers to as the bushel basket of adequacy. And from that, then revisited and perhaps modified definition of adequacy, we need to do what we call cost modeling and figure out what the relative costs are of the different components that would go into a definition of base adequacy, and then further how to weigh or differentiate additional expenses that school districts might have because of their location or the demographic profile of their students. So I'll sort of stop there and see if, Jordan, if you have other things that you want to add to that, since you've been such an important part of the work.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of some of the reasons why we're working on that, and also some of the challenges that we face. This is a longstanding issue in the state, and various attempts to remedy the situation in the past have either fallen victim to unconstitutionality or political pressure in the past. And really what we're searching for as a commission is something that the majority of New Hampshire citizens and residents can get behind in terms of a more equitable funding structure for taxpayers and a more equitable system for our students. And that's definitely the charge.
Yeah, we know that over the years, as the UNH Survey Center has conducted its regular polls of New Hampshire residents, and one of the questions that's always asked in that survey is, what do you think the most pressing problems are faced by our state? Education funding has consistently been at the top of the topics that people mention in response to that open-ended question. For a while during the Great Recession, jobs was at the top of their list of pressing problems. Over the past several years, recently, the opioid epidemic has been at the topic of people's response to that question. More recently, education funding has come up again. And so it is something certainly that has, in one way, has kind of created a drag on our economy and on the ability of our communities, to move forward because of this highly decentralized, localized way that we have of funding our schools.
Yeah, and it's something that folks across the state of all political stripes, all different regions of the state have agreed that it's a system that needs to be improved, and that's one of the reasons this commission was formed, and one of the reasons why they brought Carsey on board.
Yeah,
and our role certainly is to support the commission. The commission they're the ones that are tasked with creating the recommendations for the legislature, creating the recommendations for the state. But it's a big ask doing all of that work, and so Carsey's been contracted with to provide logistical, organizational support. We're providing research support also via the Carsey School, and also via school finance experts with the American Institutes of Research, AIR. We're contracted with them as well. And also, in a big piece is once some of the research is done, we also are going to be engaging folks throughout the state. Right now we're conducting focus groups with key stakeholders, municipal managers, school budget officers, folks who are directly working in school budgets, in school finance, in districts right now, to hear from them about what's working and what's not. And ultimately, we want to engage the broader New Hampshire public around what they think the best solutions are once we're able to bring some research and focus to bear and come up with a suite of options as a commission. And so Carseys is really going to be supporting some of that work. And so that's been the big piece that we've been doing, but it has not been without its challenges. Certainly, COVID-19 and the ongoing pandemic has proved very difficult for a body, both the legislature and then an offshoot of that being the independent commission. It's been a challenge. And so, Bruce, I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about what public access and transparency looks like as we're doing this vitally important work in the midst of a global pandemic.
Yeah, I want to first credit the commission chair, Dave Luno, for his commitment to transparency in this process. I think he's been as frustrated as anybody with the challenges around making sure that the public both can see everything that the commission does, listen to everything the commission does, listen to all the deliberations, see the people in the room that are conducting those deliberations, hear from the experts that we're bringing in to make presentations to the commission, review the extensive set of documents and resources that we've collected that are posted on the School Funding Commission website at the Carsey School, within the context and the limitations created by our reliance on technology like Zoom. I think we've developed some protocols that have created a relatively high level of public access and transparency, but we're not there yet. And we continue to, in a sense, open up the opportunities for public to attend in a virtual sense the commission meetings, the working group meetings, and have access to minutes of all of the meetings, to see what's on our agendas, to review the materials that we're reviewing as well, and to give us public input. New Hampshire Listens, which I've been a part of now since the 10 years that we began it, has always lived on face-to-face dialogue and deliberation. And in fact, we've always kind of poo-pooed the reliance on technology and social media as
Yeah.
ways for people to exchange ideas, hear each other out, and try to build solutions. So we've been humbled by this experience and learned a tremendous amount, and found a lot of opportunity, I think, in this experience as well. For example, the focus groups that you just referenced, bringing together community leaders involved in the funding of our public schools. We're doing it in a way right now that we wouldn't have been possible if we had insisted on face-to-face locations around the state to do the work. So we're trying to make lemonade out of a lemon in this case. We're still very anxious to, as soon as we can, once the legislature resumes its normal face-to-face operations, whenever that happens, then the commission will also follow that practice and resume our face-to-face deliberations as well. So we hope that sometime over the summer, or by the end of the summer, that might be possible.
Awesome. Well, I think we're sort of near the 15 minutes here. Do you have any other final thoughts, maybe about any other challenges or opportunities, or just in general?
To raise one more challenge, which will be familiar to folks in New Hampshire, and that is that this work cuts right at the intersection of the role of the state government and the role of local government. And so in New Hampshire, we have this deep tradition of what we might call local control. And we have, a high number of communities for a state our size, a large number of school districts. We have, relatively light hand from the state in terms of regulations and standards that guide the decision-making that happens at the local level. Local decision makers have a lot of, I think, responsibility and authority to decide how best to run their local schools. And I think folks have appreciated that. At the same time, especially in the 21st century, shared concerns about the capacity of the next generation of leaders, about the next workforce that will fulfill the evolving jobs in New Hampshire, and the need for some kind of baseline assurance that all students will graduate from our schools career and college ready, requires some degree of state oversight and state authority. And so I think negotiating, that path between local control and state authority is kind of a classic New Hampshire challenge. And this effort is probably the best example that I've seen of that in my 40 plus years of working in the state. So I just wanted to highlight that and recognize that. And that's one reason why our public engagement is so important, because we want the public to help us think about what the trade-offs are and how to provide the right balance between local authority and control and state guidance and financing of our public schools.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating challenge and a fun one, because it's working on something that's vitally important to our state and on our country and our world's future. And so working to make things better for New Hampshire students is a task that I look forward to every day. And so that's been a lot of fun working with you and the team and the commission on that. And so for folks who are interested in learning more about the School Funding Commission, please visit Carsey, carsey.unh.edu/school-funding, or if you Google Carsey School Funding or go to the Carsey School website, you can find lots of information. We have a whole treasure trove of school finance and funding information. All of the meetings are online. You can find a calendar of upcoming events. We're really doing our best to both keep the public informed and to help people become as knowledgeable as they'd like to be about the subject.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce.